This is the Knowledge Graph Insights Podcast, episode number 25. If you've ever visited the reference desk at your local library, you've seen the service mentality that librarians bring to their work. Rebecca Schneider brings that same sensibility to her content and knowledge graph consulting. Like all digital practitioners, her projects now include a lot more AI, but her work remains grounded in the fundamentals she learned studying library science, organizational rigor, and a focus on people and their needs.
Welcome to the Knowledge Graph Insights podcast, where experts on knowledge graphs and the semantic web share their wisdom with the digital and business communities. Our mission is to demystify and democratize knowledge graph technology and practices to make the benefits of knowledge graphs and semantic technology accessible to all. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 25 of the Knowledge Graph Insights podcast. I am really excited today to welcome to the show Rebecca Schneider. Rebecca is the co-founder and the executive director at Avenue CX, a consultancy in the Boston area. Welcome, Rebecca. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you're up to these days.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me on your show. Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Schneider. I am a recovering librarian. I was a trained librarian, worked in a library with actual books, but for most of my career, I have been focusing on enterprise content strategy. I typically furthermore, I typically focus on taxonomies, metadata, structured content, and all of that wonderful world that we live in.
Yeah, and we both come out of that content background and have sort of converged on the knowledge graph background together, kind of over the same time period. And it's really interesting, like those skills that you mentioned, the library science skills of, the taxonomy, metadata, structure, and then the application of that in structured content in the content world. As you've got in more and more into knowledge graph stuff, how is that background? I guess, what's been the transition like as you start to consider knowledge graphs in your content work? How's that been going?
Well, I mean, it's you know, uh, librarians, we're all about organizing things, right? And we like to organize stuff. And this is just sort of the next step in helping organize stuff so people can find things. I mean, that's what we're all about, right? We want to help people find things. So, moving into more and more sophisticated mechanisms that help people not only find things, but leverage content in new and different ways and useful ways is I think just a logical progression.
Yeah, that's really, that content discovery, like finding things, discovery, and uncovering things. That's sort of always been the information architecture part of content practice. But how is that changing? Like we were talking a little bit before we went on the air about, the emergence of LLMs and then the ensuing interest in knowledge graphs associated with that. How is it? Are you finding different challenges in helping like machines discover stuff as opposed to humans?
Uh, less so, well, okay, there's a couple of different aspects to that. One is that, as we know, structured content is so very important for the success of LLMs, AI applications, etc. And the thing is I have to convince my clients to take the time to clean their house, so to speak, right? And say, okay, you need to clean up your data, you need to clean up your content, you need to get rid of, the old, outdated, trivial, extraneous stuff so you have a clean basis to start from, right? And convincing clients to take that time is a bit of a struggle because they see all the fancy LLMs and all the different wonderful things people are doing, and they just want to jump in with both feet, which is great, but you need to have a solid basis first. So it takes some convincing to have people take the time to do that. And then on the LLM side, we have to acknowledge that there are many different kinds of LLMs, some, with different pros and cons, depending on what the use case is. And you need to not only understand the LMs, but also the organization's business drivers. What are their goals? What are their objectives? What are they trying to do with this? Because it's not just to, write me a poem in the style of E. E. Cummings, and about about apples or something, right? There are definite business drivers and goals because a lot of monies are putting a lot of funds into these kinds of technologies, and you got to make sure that you're getting your bang for your buck.
Yeah, as you say that, you're reminding me that like everybody's wrestling, you're not wrestling, but figuring out like how to do work with RAG architectures and graph RAG and all these
Mhm.
hybrid AI architectures. And I love the way that it sounds like your work, you start with the business goals and kind of back up from there, which seems like a good approach. How have you like are you discovering any like patterns or approaches as you figure out like how do you balance it? Because that's an interesting triangle of needs, like the business part of the client needs, their sort of content needs, and then the capabilities of the LLMs and the other tooling in these architectures. That's got to be a lot, it sounds like.
It is, and you also have to think about how much work am I going to make people do? You can't train everybody to be prompt engineers, right? And so you need to think about kind of from their perspective what they're trying to get out of whatever application you're creating, and also their interaction with it to the extent to which, yes, the information is in there, but you have to ask better questions. Does that mean I have to retrain people on how to ask better questions? To what extent is that necessary? Or are there other ways of getting, leveraging how we use an LM in this sort of hybrid structure? How can we use, you know, ontologies, et cetera, informing the knowledge graph to, help the user so they don't have to be prompt engineers, right? That they can get what they need with the minimum of fuss.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you say that, like using ontologies to inform the knowledge graph, I was just kind of assumed in my head that like ontologies were a prerequisite for knowledge graphs. But like I had Jessica Talisman on a while back, and she makes the case that like you can do a lot just with a SCOS-based thesaurus, and that like so did you consider that kind of continuum of semantic sophistication, like from just term lists to taxonomies to thesauri to the full-blown ontologies. Are you playing across that spectrum in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, not everybody, a lot of people say, well, taxonomy, and they use it to refer to controlled vocabularies, ontologies, et cetera. To them, it's all taxonomy. Well, it's not actually. It is a spectrum. It is a progression of, okay, I've got my controlled vocabulary, then I have hierarchical structure, and then I have, synonyms and use for and all of that kind of stuff. And then you have the ontology, right? So it's definitely, to my mind, a spectrum. And sometimes you don't need the full blown, I agree, you don't need the full blown ontology. You can do a lot with a well structured, well thought out taxonomy in an ASCOS architecture, and you can really leverage that, and you might not need to go the full ontology route. Um, Baby steps.
Yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
baby steps, that's a lesson that comes up everywhere. And that's it. And some of those baby steps, so like this seems to come, I've talked to a lot of people about this from different backgrounds, and this seems to come really naturally to librarians or people out of a library science background that comfort with that spectrum of options for how to organize things. Is that's kind of I didn't go to library science school. I've hung out with y'all a lot, but is that sort of like just a part of the mindset of a librarian?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people actually become librarians as a kind of like a second career. When I went to school back in the day, there were people who, um, were lawyers, um, or were in the biological sciences or something like that. But they all had the same sense of wanting to organize things, and also a sense of service, a sense of wanting to help people, in particular. So it's, helping them find things, get what they need, things like that. That tended, to be kind of I won't call it the central factor, but certainly, the predilections are certainly there. And you don't have to be, being a former librarian or going to library school or iSchool or et cetera. You don't need to do that to really get into this work, but you have to have kind of uh, be willing to take on that role of the organizer, right? You have to want to like it. Like if you have a really, carefully organized record collection, then you might want to consider yourself a library, having that tendency, right? If you organize all your stuff in your pantry just so, and if all of your spices are alphabetically organized, that might be a flag there.
I love that. Flags like that you might be a redneck this meme. Now there you might be a librarian.
Librarian,
If you
yes,
yeah.
yeah,
Hey, and what you just said, I love what you just said about especially the librarians who come in as a second career. That one of the considerations in that is this notion of service, and I'm thinking of like every super helpful reference librarian I've ever encountered, like as the tip of the iceberg on that. But the other thing about that reminds me that I know enough librarians and have hung out with y'all enough to know that there's a lot going on in the background too. And when you said earlier, like that notion of like the other ways to use LLMs besides like that conversational interface stuff. Is that part of what you were talking about there? Is this sort of like the machinery under the surface that's kind of helping or structure things? Am I reading that right?
yeah, absolutely. Because, for example, somebody may want an answer to a very technical problem, but they don't want to plow through, thousands of pages of documentation in order to answer a specific question. But if the user can just ask the LLM, hey, what's the heat tolerance for this particular part in these environmental conditions, then you can get an answer, you can get references to that answer, so you can, build, so the user knows that, oh, okay, that's where they pulled it from. Okay, that makes sense. Yes, I didn't have to go through all this documentation, right? It saves them time. And for many people who are very busy, time is a precious commodity that, so looking to save time, all other ways of, making things more efficient, again, back to those business goals. What are we trying to do? How can we help people work smarter and not have to do rote things that, you know, don't need to, that just waste their time, but they have to do it in order to get to an answer.
Yeah, that's it. That one, the efficiency one, that's an interesting one because as a consultant, I want to get your take on this because it's the two main benefits of any kind of automation and technology are like reduced costs or improved bottom line revenue. And
Mhm.
it's a lot easier to, when you can show the latter, it's like, wow, golden. But it's sometimes hard to show that efficiency gains. And do you have like sort of metrics or heuristics or benchmarks that you look at in your practice to illustrate the efficiency?
Yeah, we do. We definitely look at, amount of time saved, looking at, so for example, if you're in a sales organization and, I just saved you 10 hours, let's just say a week, then you can use that 10 hours to have face to face with clients, with customers, et cetera, and sell more, right? So it's that, definitely that time saved, the efficiency, um, you know, again, helping people get to that, place where they can do their jobs without, again, having to spend a lot of extra time on honestly things they shouldn't have to do. They should be used more strategically. Because it's not about taking away someone's job. It's not about that. It's like, let me help you find better uses for your time as opposed to, looking to make you redundant or something. That's not the point. The point is know, you're a smart person and I want you to put you in a a role where you can do more interesting things with your time, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's occurring to me as you were talking that a lot of this stuff, a lot of this efficiency, a lot of the things you're talking about trace back to that structured content and the fact that you've done that and the fact that there's metadata associated with it. Um, how do you like one of the things that struck me is because I come out of a similar non-library but very contenty background and I'm kind of come into the knowledge graph world that way. And one of the things I've found is like the similarities between content modeling and kind of domain modeling and ontology design. Are you finding the same thing? Are you?
Well, again, I think it's a yeah, in essence that, it's a spectrum, right? It's not an either or, it's a spectrum. So, first you need to figure out the basic lay of the land, right? That's kind of more of your, domain modeling. How do I understand this at a higher level? But I can't implement based on this domain model. I've had some rough out definitions. You know, I've, you know, identified key entities, key interactions, but it's not the lurid detail that I would need for implementation. And that's where that content, much more specific content model comes into play, right? Okay, I know I need to have a structured document. Well, the content model, says, well, we need a title and we need a byline and we need, and all of that stuff that goes into, the detail of it all. Because you need that to implement in order to have that really good structured content. And then you have tools like DITA, XML, things like that that can help you do that along the way.
Yeah. Do you work mostly in like CCMSs and DITA XML, or do you do other kinds of content systems as well?
It's a
Okay.
mix. Yeah, it's a mix. Some, data based, it's some, not standard, but some just content management systems, digital asset management systems. People ask me, well, what's the best one to work with? And I always say, well, they're all really good or they're all really, really bad. It depends on your requirements. So I can't give you an answer. You have to figure out what your requirements are and then, pick the tool that's the best fit for purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, that it depends is always the consultant's answer. It's a pretty handy. I use it all the time.
Yeah,
It's like,
well, it's true.
no, it is. But the interesting thing to me about DITA is a particularly good fit for this. It seems like I know Michael Tosca's talked a lot about his DOM graph rag stuff and the fact that it's a W3C standard and fits in nicely. But just I guess, but like you said a minute ago, like the model is just the start and the implementation, whatever. Like you can. There's so many factors that go into that, the technical capabilities of the org and all that stuff. How do as you're modeling, are you sometimes modeling to a specific technical implementation, or sometimes, or is that almost always the case, or do you sometimes model and then decide on the implementation?
Yes.
It depends.
It depends.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get.
I tried not to say it depends.
Thanks.
Yeah, for some clients, they've already selected the tool, and then I I like work I I dislike working with that to a certain extent because sometimes I feel like it's a round peg into a square hole, because they've selected something they thought it was great, but but I'm digging under the I'm in the belly of the beast going, okay, how am I going to make this work? As opposed to, so ideally I'd like to design them, things like metadata schema, et cetera, like that, sort of technology agnostic. What does the client really need? And then go from there. But I don't always have that luxury, to be honest.
Yeah, and I know, like I've seen architectures where like the metadata, like there's like 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 semantic tooling adjacent to content systems or something like it. Sometimes they're built in.
Mhm.
But I guess so that I can see how that would pan out that way. But underlying that, and I don't see this. I know that places have it, but I don't know that they articulate it. Like the idea of a metadata strategy. That's always in the back of my mind as I go into these things because it it just seems it's so germane to so many of these activities. How do you think about like, because you know you're going to need that metadata down the road. How do you approach a project? How do you do you have like something that you call a metadata strategy, or how do you make sure you are that all the metadata needs in these systems are considered as you proceed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So honestly, I interview stakeholders, I talk to the business, I talk to current content creators about their pain points. I talk to, folks about, okay, what are we trying to solve? What's the problem we're trying to solve here? Because there are a lot of problems that don't need machine learning or knowledge graphs. They just need a really good metadata structure if they're only trying to do certain things, right? And so I talked to them about, their needs. What are they going to be using this for? And then it's like, reviewing their content or that they've currently have plan to create, etc. And then, pull together, okay, this is the metadata I think you need. So here's like the administrative metadata, which is pretty straightforward, and here's some descriptive metadata. The whole thing is to make sure that it's not overly burdensome, right? That I have developed extensive metadata schemas for people, and you know, if they promise on a stack of Bibles to, use it, but I'm always very concerned about, overdoing it, making sure you just have, again, that fit for purpose, the right amount of metadata to get the job done without being overly burdensome, because things go through the tagging workflow and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and as you said that it's like just enough metadata, it sounds like is the goal.
Yes.
And a lot of that is driven by, well, it's interesting. Have you found, like I know so I've seen some workflows now where they're using, like this has been going on for a while with just old fashioned machine learning, but sort of are things getting not maybe not easier, but are there more things you can do as you're designing content workflows to facilitate like tagging or
Yes.
describing other kinds of metadata?
Hmm. Yes, and because you have these tools now that can do text analysis and recommend tags, and then people can say, "Yep, that's right," or "No, that's not right." Also, you can enforce, governance, but a little bit more easily now. For example, I had a client years and years and years ago, and they had a knowledge base, and for one of their more very popular knowledge base articles, which was very, very short, but it had key pieces of information to help the customer support people, they they over tagged so much. There were more tags than the words in the actual article. Um, and then the tags got so noisy that they just stopped using them and started the people entering in the information would fashion their titles in such a way so they knew they could easily bring it up quickly. So it's yeah, you want to get assistance with automated tagging and stuff like that, which is great, but also you need to enforce governance because you don't want to create noise that's going to um, create problems down the road.
Yeah. As you're saying that, it's kind of like that thing that like a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Like you emphasize the importance of tagging and people start to perceive that as thing like, oh, I've got to get these things everywhere. And then you end up with more tags than content. But also you end up with people doing like keyword stuffing in headlines and things like that,
Oh
it
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like.
yeah.
Yeah, so that seems like a really germane issue in terms of like from a number of perspectives, but in like especially from like a usability and readability, legibility and all the content things. But from a semantic perspective, like, do you run the risk of diluting or perverting the meaning of that document or
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
content artifact?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and then you'll also have people, trying to accommodate for search that might not be properly tuned. So you'll have like, you're not sure how people are going to search for it. So is it e-commerce? Is it e-commerce one word? Things like that. So they'll pull in all these variations that in a well-developed, taxonomy and thesaurus, you won't have to do that. It'll just accommodate for you. You have controlled list of values, things like that. So people aren't, trying to game the system, so to speak.
Yeah, that's the classic place for, well, the combination of a controlled vocabulary and a good thesaurus there, and boom, you're good to go. It's and that kind of thing. Are those kind of practices? We were talking before we went on the air about when I talked to Jessica Talisman, she's talked about the 3,000-year history of library science and information architecture versus, data science is, maybe 50 years old. So, are you finding as you work more, because it sounds like you must be working more with data scientists, data engineers, machine learning engineers, and things like that. What's the back and forth there in terms of like understanding the benefits of like, controlled vocabularies and taxonomic schemes?
Yeah, one thing that's important, I think, that people might not realize is, at least for, when you're when you're focusing on a particular topic area, like for, electrical engineering, I'll say, or, even, some sort of clothing retail or something. I often use the phrase, know your collection. And which means, you know, I'm not expecting someone to be an electrical engineer. I'm not expecting someone to know how to build oil rigs. But what I'm expecting is that they'll understand the basic concepts of a particular subject area. And because in terms of data analysis and things like that, the things that are coming back, you have to be able to critically ascertain, okay, does this really make sense in this context? And knowing, you know, I'm not just saying that you have to go out and, get a master's in something or a bachelor's in something, but, go to YouTube to learn, read a few books, learn a little bit about kind of what you're working with so you can more effectively evaluate what's coming back. And of course, I obviously, I've switched. So as a taxonomist, as a consultant, I've worked with, you know, uh, financial services, electrical engineering, um, wine and liquor sales, jewelry. I mean, I'm not, and that's home improvement, hardware. And I'm not saying that I learned, all that there was to know about a particular topic area. What I'm saying is I do my best to ask good questions and, try and really understand what I'm looking at, right?
Yeah,
And I
that's
think
really
that's super important.
I agree. It's reminding me that like we tend in our heads to just think subject matter experts here, ontologists and taxonomists and engineers over here. But in fact, they can work really better together if they each learn a little bit about the adjacent domain, like get a little bit of that subject matter expertise. I'm thinking now in the ontology world lately, there's been a lot of talk about like, I need tooling to help me better work with my subject matter experts, to help them see how the classes and concepts and things are, how their subject matter expertise is represented in the system to kind of verify that, like, yeah, that's correct. That's really. Is there tooling that you like for that? Like you just said, like it's old fashioned tooling. You go read a couple books, watch some YouTube videos. But in terms of the flip side of that, of like helping, to get the subject matter experts at least a little bit acquainted with how you're
Mhm.
operating. Like you said earlier, like they think of it's taxonomy. That's just like they think all this stuff is that. Do you have to tease out the different practices and
Yeah, yeah. And actually, with one of my current clients, when we do subject matter review, um, and we take 3 slides. I think it's three. Yeah, 3 slides, and we make them a taxonomist. So 3, 4 slides. We walk them through the conceptual. This is how you think. This is our approach. This is how we think about things. This is how we think about taxonomy. This is how we think about attributes. And here are some examples of how you can leverage this. Here are the top kind of guiding rules for category creation. These are the guiding rules for attribute creation. We talk a little bit about hierarchy, and then, and oftentimes they'll ask really good questions. So, like, for example, we use the example of and a very small world of men's clothing. And, some intrepid soul said, well, what about jumpsuits? Where do they go? And things. So they're really starting to think about this stuff, right? And then we can dive into the details of, their particular, category of content or products.
Nice. If those 3 slides are available anywhere, I'd love to put those in the show notes. If it's proprietary, no worries at all. But yeah. Hey, Rebecca, I can't believe it. We're coming up close to time already. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure, is there anything we haven't got to yet that you want to make sure we share, or something you want to revisit from the conversation? Or
Um, that's a good question. I think the big thing is be willing to take the time to clean up your content, clean up your data, um, in order to make a successful, uh, AI application or whatever you're trying to do. Understand why you're trying to do it, and don't be afraid to talk to people. People like to talk about their work. People like to talk about what they do. And ask questions, be willing to learn of it.
nice. Yeah, as the host of an interview format podcast, I wholeheartedly applaud that last version. Hey, one very last thing, Rebecca, if folks want to connect or follow you online, what's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn, Rebecca Schneider. I also have feel free to contact me through email, which is rschneider, rschneider at avenuecx.com.
Amazing. Great. I'll put those in the show notes also.
Okay,
Well,
great.
thank you so much, Rebecca. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me.
For show notes and to sign up for our newsletter, visit our website at knowledgegraphinsights.com. And please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for listening.